time you're found with your chin on the ground, there's a lot to be learned, so look around. Just what makes that little old ant think he'll move that rubber tree plant? Anyone knows an ant can't move a rubber tree plant, but he has high hopes. He has high hopes. He's got high apple pie in the sky. So anytime you're getting low, instead of letting go, just remember that ant. Oops, there goes another rubber tree plant. Oops, there goes another rubber tree plant. When trouble calls and your back's to the wall, there's a lot to be learned. That wall could fall. Once there was a silly old ram, thought he'd punch a hole in the dam. No one could make that ram scram. He get buttoned that dam, 'cause he had high hopes. You can sing it. He had high hopes. He had high apple pie in the sky. Hope so anytime you're feeling bad, instead of feeling sad, just remember that ram. Oops, there goes a billion kilowatt dam. Oops, there goes a billion kilowatt dam. All problems just a toy balloon. They'll be bursting soon. They're just bound to go pop. Whoops, there goes another problem, kerplop. Whoops, there goes another problem, kerplop. Whoops, there goes a billion kilowatt dam. Whoops, there goes another rubber tree plant. Whoops, there goes another problem, kerplop.
Our opening words this morning are from a poem by Janet Hutchinson. Of course I want the truth, but here's the rub. Truth doesn't sit around, still as a rock. It breathes and flows and turns inside out. Ever seen a lion in a cage? He paces and glowers. That must be how God feels, locked in our little religions. Look how big the sky is, the deep distances between stars. Little speck, that's you. Laughable speck, that's me. How could we contain the truth, all that overwhelming light? Our truth is just a pinprick in mystery's velvet curtain. Even so, see how we struggle to fix an eyeball to that peep show's tiny window.
And I don't know how many of you have read Harry Potter. I was sick last week, and every time I get sick, I reread Harry Potter because it's just so good for me. It makes me feel better right away. So you remember the Room of Requirement. It's this magical room in the castle that only shows up if you're right outside the door of it thinking about what you really need. And then the door will appear and you can go in and what you need will be there. Well, my story this morning is about a box, but I forgot to bring my box. And what should I see tucked inside of this pedestal but a box? So if I didn't believe in magic before, I would now. So how many of you have heard of Pandora? Okay, now, if you're talking about the music streaming service, put your hands down. How many of you have still heard of Pandora? Okay, we're doing pretty well. Pandora is a person from a story, a very, very, very old story from Greek mythology. And, you know, people all over the world, from the earliest days that people could talk and tell stories, have told stories to try to make sense out of why the world is the way it is. And this is one of those stories. Now, there were a lot of events leading up to this story that I'm not going to bother to tell you about because it would take too long. You just need to know that according to Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman to ever be created by the gods. There were men in the world, but there weren't any women. And she was created as part of a sneaky plan, because human beings had done something that made the gods really angry, and the gods wanted to get back at humanity. So they created this woman, and they named her Pandora, which basically, the word Pandora means that which has everything in it. It's like meaning perfection, a person who has everything. So she was beautiful, she was smart, she was kind, she was just a perfect person. She was everything you would want in a friend. And then they got her to marry a man named Epimetheus. Now, you would think that Epimetheus, who knew the gods were angry with humanity, would be a little suspicious of a woman who was being presented to him by Zeus, who was the head of the gods. But Pandora was so wonderful that he couldn't be suspicious because he couldn't imagine anything bad could come from someone as wonderful as Pandora. And she fell in love with him, and so they got married. Well, the gift that Zeus gave to Pandora as a wedding gift was a box. It was a really beautiful box. And he said to her, the only thing is, you're not allowed to open it. You must never, ever, ever open the box. So what do you think she wanted to do? Open the box, of course. What's the first thing we want to do when someone tells us we can't do something? We want to do it. Besides, she had all the gifts of human beings, right? And one of the gifts that we have is curiosity. That's how we learn about the world, by being curious. So of course she wanted to look inside the box, but she knew she wasn't supposed to. So she went back and forth. She'd take it off the shelf. She'd look at it. And then she'd put it back away. And a couple days later, she'd take it off the shelf. She'd look at it. She'd put it back away. And finally one day, she couldn't stand it anymore. She decided she was going to open the box. And so she did. Now, this box is empty. Just warning you. Nothing exciting is going to come out of this box. But how many people, don't tell, but how many people know what came out of the box when she opened it? Okay, some of you do. So she opened the box, and out of the box flew this swarm of things that looked like insects that went all over her and started stinging her and biting her before they flew off into the world. And those insects, and so she slammed the lid back on the box, but it was too late. They had all gotten out. Those insects, they weren't really insects. They were all the troubles and problems that human beings ever have to deal with. All the bad things you can think of came out of that box. So what are some things that, if you think about things that you're worried about or scared of or bad things that happen in the world, what are some of the things you think of? Spiders? Spiders were probably in that box. What else?
I got stung by yellow tooth. It hurts.
Being stung by insects. So biting insects.
No, it actually stung me.
It stung, but right, you got stung by it, right.
On the bottom of my foot.
Oh, I bet that hurt a lot. So maybe that's one of the things that was in the box. What else might have been in the box? Disease. Things that make you sick. What else? Ladybugs? I kind of like ladybugs. I think they'd be in the happy box. This is the upsetting box. War was in that box. Sickness was in that box. Evil was in that box. Meanness, all the bad things that people do to each other. Tornadoes. All the things that make it so hard sometimes in the world to be human were in that box. And Pandora had let them all out. What was that? All right, see me after the service. So Pandora was horrified by what she had done. And her husband, Epimetheus, came home, and he was horrified too. And then they realized something was still, the box was still kind of rattling. There was something in there that still wanted to come out. And they weren't sure that they should even open the box. But they decided that they'd probably done about as much harm as you could possibly do by that point. So they went ahead and they opened the box. And one last thing flew out of the box. Who knows what it was? Hope. In the form of a butterfly. And that's what was in the box that I was going to give to all of you, were butterflies. But I forgot the box. But hope flew out of the box. The very last thing in the very bottom of the box was hope. And so Pandora knew that even though now the world was full of things like misery and death and war and disease and all those bad things, sadness, she also knew that the world was full of hope, too. And that as long as she had hope, she'd be able to keep going. What are some of the things that make you feel hopeful? What gives you hope? Your dog. Absolutely. Things that love us, give us hope. Spring gives us hope. What else? Children give us hope. Friends. So Pandora remembered that we need to hold on to all the things that give us hope. And those are the things that can help us deal with the trouble that comes our way as well. Okay? So remember to be hopeful and think about the things that give you hope. And next time I come, I'll try to remember whatever it was that was supposed to go with the story. Okay? So you can see next time I come whether I remember or not. Butterfly. Maybe I'll try to remember to bring the butterflies next time to make up for this time. Okay, they're very pretty butterflies.
Take all of your wasted honor, every little past frustration. Take all of your so-called problems, better put them in quotations. Say what you need to say, say what you need to say, say what you need to say, say what you need to say. Walking like a one-man army, fighting with the shadows in your head, living out the same old moment, knowing you'd be better off instead if you could only say what you need to say, say what you need to say, say what you need to say, say what you need to say. Have no fear of giving over. Have no fear for giving in. You'd better know that in the end, it's better to say too much than never to say what you need to say again. Even if your hands are shaking and your faith is broken, even as the eyes are closing, do it with a heart wide open. Say what you need to say, 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 say what you need to say.
The reading this morning is really a meditation. It comes from my colleague Ruth Southworth. Torn by desires to sit back and to enjoy the beauty of the world, to savor the blue skies and the gentle days, and by desires to recast the world and fight its evils, to save the world. Torn by all those things that hurt and confuse and make no sense amid beauty, yet supported by all those things that heal and hold us. Smiles, kisses, mountain vistas and gentle waves, warm words. We live in mystery. We live torn apart at times, so much glory and so much pain. We live in faith. Faith in ourselves and in each other. Faith that we can create bonds of the Spirit that proclaim that we are not alone. We have much health within us. We can live through the heartache to new life. So for the grace of the world and all the tumble too, on this day we give thanks.
It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Little Moses was found in a stream. Little Moses was found in a stream. He floated on water to old Pharaoh's daughter. She fished him, she says, from that stream. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. You're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so.
I'm really annoyed with myself because I'm going to start out by telling you about this beautiful song by Carolyn McDade. She's the same one who wrote Spirit of Life, which most of you know by heart, probably. She's written lots of songs. There's one that I particularly love that I learned way back at some religious education conference. She wrote it in '84. Never got the attention it should have, didn't get into our hymnal. But I have a copy with music, and if I'd gotten it to Avi ahead of time, I could have been singing it for you instead of reading you the words, and it would have been really fun. So, well, wouldn't be quite the same. But it's called Trouble and Beauty. I'll read you the verses, and then I'll sing the chorus once when I'm done reading the verses. By these laboring wings we have come thus far to this place in the world where we see trouble and beauty. We see trouble, we see beauty, and that far wandering star still calls us on. By this breath conspired we have come thus far to this place in our song where we sing trouble and beauty. We sing trouble, we sing beauty, and that far wandering star still calls us on. By these hearts of rage, we have come thus far to this place in our love where we dare trouble and beauty. We dare trouble, we dare beauty, and that far wandering star still calls us on. And the chorus goes like this. It's the star will rise and shine, rise and shine. It will rise and shine till earth's people all are free. It calls to you, it calls to me. Keep those laboring wings till all are free. So that's Trouble and Beauty by Carolyn McDade. And I find myself coming back to that song over and over, and especially recently. Because I look around the world and I see trouble and I see beauty. And that far wandering star still calls us on. When I was ordained almost 26 years ago, the congregation, in fact, it's just, almost exactly 26 years ago. I think it was in March. The congregation said to me, among us and wherever you may be called to serve, we would have you preach the word of truth in freedom and in love. This call to speak the truth in love, I'm missing a page here. There we go, just out of order. This call to speak the truth in love is a promise almost universally made by ministers at ordinations and installations. And that word, that promise to speak the truth in love, makes it clear that our congregations demand of our ministers that they seek the truth, and that our ministers have the freedom to speak that truth as they understand it, even when it is a truth that is hard to hear. But because truth is sometimes hard to hear, we are also called to speak that truth from a place of love. Now, this language of speaking the truth in love, I thought, oh, that's great. That's some Unitarian thing that goes back to the early 1800s, right? Well, no, it's from the Bible. We didn't make it up. It's from Paul's letter to the Ephesians, this command to speak the truth in love. And he's not just talking to church leaders. He's talking to the whole body of believers in Ephesus. So while ministers are perhaps set apart in some very specific way, not special, we're not special, but we have a particular calling to seek and speak the truth in love. We're not the only ones who are supposed to do this. Everyone is called to speak the truth in love. Now, we all know that hard truths are easier to hear when they come to us from a place of love and not judgment. Probably we could all tell stories about a time when someone spoke the truth to us, maybe a hard truth that they thought we needed to hear. And if we're lucky, they spoke that truth in love. I'll give you one very specific example, and my apologies if some of you have heard this story before. If you're like me, there are certain experiences in your life that are so formative that you come back to them again and again. But when I was in seminary, I was on a leadership team for the Unitarian Universalist student group. And at one of our meetings, the discussion got really lively. I was passionate about whatever the topic was. I have no idea now what it was. And I participated in the discussion with great energy. After the meeting, another woman in the leadership group who had been very quiet during the discussion took me aside. It was clear that she felt very uncomfortable doing so, that she was starting a conversation she really did not want to have, but it was also clear that she felt she had to speak to me. She explained to me that some people require time to think and consider their response before they jump in to comment on an issue. This had honestly never occurred to me. And she said, when people like me, who think quickly on their feet and know what they want to say right away, just keep talking and never leave any pauses in the conversation, people like her, who need time in quiet to consider what they want to say before they say it, never get to say anything. She wanted me to understand this because she knew I was heading into ministry. And she knew that if I didn't learn to rein myself in at least a little bit and leave space for other people to have a voice, I was not going to do good ministry. She said all this to me very gently, even reluctantly, but she was still clear and firm about its importance. She didn't intend to shame me. Of course, I felt ashamed. And when I tried to apologize to her for my behavior in that particular meeting, she was clear that she was not really concerned about her feelings in that particular meeting. She was concerned with my ability going forward to draw the best out of the people I was working with. She told me the truth, and she spoke it from a place of love. She believed in my potential for ministry, and she wanted me to do it better. She believed in my ability to change and do it better. You could say she saw the trouble in my behavior, but she also saw the beauty. And I needed her to name that trouble. And I've been grateful to her ever since, because my awareness of that tendency has helped me rein in some of its more destructive effects. Not all of them, and I forget, but I'm more likely to at least warn people ahead of time that I have that tendency and encourage them to rein me in if I forget to rein myself in. I don't think I could have heard her and responded constructively, though, if she had not also affirmed the potential beauty of my ministry, because that's what gave me the hope that I could do better. As we look around our world right now, there's an awful lot of truth-telling going on. At least there are a lot of people saying a lot of things that they are convinced is the truth. It can be very hard to tease out exactly where the truth lies. But it seems to me that very few of the folks out there trying to tell the truth are doing it with a whole lot of love. At least I'm not feeling the love. I don't know about you guys. We certainly know that the world is full of trouble. Many of us feel bludgeoned every time we listen to the news. And that can be true for folks anywhere on the political spectrum these days. Whether we're tuning into Fox News or PBS, we're surrounded by divisiveness and bitterness and anger coming from all sides. And toxic exchanges are choking Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds. But you don't need me to tell you that. If you read the paper, if you listen to the news, if you spend any time on social media at all, then you're already bombarded. And yes, we need to be paying attention. We need to sign petitions and join marches and write letters and engage in difficult conversations and go to protests and keep seeking the truth and speaking out with all the love and compassion that we can find within ourselves. And our awareness of all the things that are wrong with the world can leave us with such a sense of urgency about following them and confronting them and focusing all of our energy on those problems that we see nothing but the trouble. When trouble seems to be overwhelming the world, taking the time to look for beauty may seem self-indulgent or frivolous or even irresponsible. But somehow we have to remember that trouble is not the only truth out there. Because if we spend all of our time focused on the urgency of the trouble, eventually we become unable to do anything at all. We become paralyzed, because that just leads to despair. There's a wonderful quotation from E.B. White, and I think the reading I shared had this as the inspiration behind it. E.B. White has long been a favorite of mine for his children's books like Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, but he also wrote a lot of wonderful things for adults, and there's a lot of dry wit scattered through his essays and other pieces. And he wrote, "If the world were merely seductive, that would be easy. If it were merely challenging, that would be no problem. But I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." To improve the world or to enjoy the world. I've also heard people use the language of saving the world or savoring the world. And yes, that can make it hard to plan the day until we realize that they always go together. It's because we so love and savor and enjoy our beautiful world that we want to improve it or save it. It's the very beauty that inspires us and gives us the strength to confront the trouble, that allows us to keep love and compassion at the heart of our truth-telling. We are called both to savor and to save. So we need to deepen our awareness and our appreciation for everything that's good in the world. As Matthew Fox points out in his book Original Blessing, if we savored more, we would be more in touch with our moral outrage, because our love of the world would increase so dramatically that we would become less and less tolerant of death forces. Sometimes, in order to be able to look at the truth from a perspective of hopefulness, we have to take little breaks from the truth. We have to give ourselves respite from looking at the trouble. At least we need to take breaks from the constant barrage of vitriol and anger and be very intentional about looking for other kinds of truth. My husband John forwarded me a great opinion piece from the Washington Post by Michael Gershon, who's a regular columnist of theirs and who writes insightful and sometimes scathing political commentary. He obviously follows the political scene with intense scrutiny, and he's constantly keeping up with everything. I mean, if you go and look at his stuff, whatever has just happened, he is on it and writing something really biting about it. But he describes in this particular piece a time when he had to take an extended break from all digital communication. He was in a medical setting that didn't allow phones or laptops. He doesn't say why. We're speculating maybe a severe concussion, when often people have to completely avoid reading, focusing, screen time. But he describes how very unsettling it was to be suddenly cut off. And especially given what I then learned about him and how connected he is all the time, I would think even more so, he was experiencing a kind of stillness that has become a rarity for most of us. I had been afraid I'd go stir crazy, he writes, and then he adds, which I promptly did. He struggled at first with the quiet, confronting the loneliness and even the hostility of all his own internal stuff, with no distractions to keep him from thinking about all the things within him that he was unhappy with. But eventually he realized, and I quote, "The uninterrupted quiet allows us to stand above ourselves and gain a more objective frame." And then he goes on to say, among the first nugget of eternal wisdom you discover is that a day without Twitter is like a day without anthrax. Taking a rest from rage is highly therapeutic. Now he acknowledges that the silence is frightening. He can't hide in the distractions of his busyness or numb himself with electronic entertainment. Now, Michael Gerson is not optimistic about the state of the world right now, just as many of us are not. And the silence offered him the space to feel the true depth of his fear and his dismay. But because he was not plugged in to things that were constantly feeding that anger and that fear, the silence also made space for him to feel other things. He writes, so how do I respond to my well-reasoned pessimism? That in a certain light, the dust in my room looks like snow. And the actual snow outside my window looks like the preparation for some vast, extravagant cosmic wedding. That the cranky lady down the hospital hall, I asked for peaches, not pears, is really a miracle of chemistry, engineering, and poetry that humans are not even close to understanding. Notice he doesn't say that he's become optimistic. He's still not optimistic. But he is able to see the wonder, the beauty that is present even in the midst of all the trouble that is so real. He's not optimistic, but he has hope. We often use the words hope and optimism as if they're interchangeable, but they're very different things. In his essay, The Politics of Hope, Václav Havel describes hope as an orientation of the heart. And he writes, hope is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Hope is definitely not the same as optimism, he writes. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. That's optimism. We're optimistic if we think it's going to be okay. But hope is the certainty that something makes sense. Even if we don't think it's going to turn out okay, or it might not turn out okay, it's worth working for anyway. That's hope. There are many times when we're trying to face the truth that we just can't be optimistic. We may not have any real confidence that things are going to turn out well. But we can hold on to what makes sense. We can still see the beauty in the world, the power of goodness and truth that give us the strength and the courage to go on working. That's hope. In Carolyn McDade's song, that's the far wandering star that calls us on. Now, we all have times that we're not optimistic, that we're not feeling cheerful and just so sure that everything's going to be just fine. That's really normal. It's entirely appropriate in certain situations when we really don't think there's a chance that things are going to resolve well. And it can leave us feeling sad and discouraged and tired and burned out. Even then, we can look for the glimpses of beauty that can still give us a sense of hope. I just want to make a distinction here because it's when when we can't even find those glimpses of beauty, when we can't find any sense of hope or possibility, then it might be time to get some professional help, to go for screening, to see whether we're dealing with some level of depression that is beyond the lack of optimism that our world may be calling forth in us. So I want to make that distinction because I think it's one we sometimes overlook. Going back to that op-ed piece about a day without Twitter, Gerson goes on to quote Marilyn Robinson's beautiful novel Gilead, where the elderly minister who is nearing the end of his life reflects, "Wherever you turn your eyes, the world can shine like transfiguration. You don't have to bring a thing to it except a little willingness to see. Only who could have the courage to see it?" Gerson calls this courage to see the settled choice to see the goodness and joy at the heart of things. Calls it a choice. He manages, even in that discouraging environment of the hospital, to see the possibility of transfiguration in something as simple as the dust in his room, or the snow outside his window, or the miracle of the cranky woman down the hall. I received the gift of transfiguration one morning when everything was going wrong. And this is another one of those experiences so central to my development that it's possible I've told it before. I was headed to a meeting. I was running late. I was angry with myself because I was running late. When I stopped for gas, I ran in to buy coffee and a bagel because, of course, I had been running too late to have breakfast. So I grabbed what I wanted and I rushed over to the counter. And the man behind the cash register, who had a lovely accent that I could not identify, was very slow and very deliberate as he rang up my purchases. "Would you like a bag?" he asked me. "No, I don't need a bag," I said, just wanting to get out of there. "Do you want some napkins?" he said. "No," I said, "I have everything I need." He stopped and looked at me with delight and said, "Oh, you are a lucky woman." He spoke the truth to me in love that day. He could not possibly have missed my agitation and my impatience. But he had the compassion to take a risk and point out that that was not the whole story of my life in that moment. I had been so caught up in my troubles that I forgot to see the beauty. But he just held up this little mirror and made me look at the blessedness of my own life. So, where do you find beauty? And what gives you hope? It might be something as simple as coming to the fellowship on Sunday morning and having the chance to share a joy or a sorrow and knowing that the people who hear it care. It might be a chance interaction with a stranger who offers you an unexpected kindness. It might be a moment like the one I had on a walk a few weeks ago when suddenly I heard an unfamiliar bird song and looked up to see some kind of woodpecker hopping around above my head, singing his heart out. There's always beauty to be found. It doesn't make the trouble any less real, but it gives us the hope to keep going and enter the fray and be part of making the world, saving the world, improving the world. So if we're committed to speaking the truth in love, let's commit ourselves to speaking the whole truth. Yes, we need to speak out and act when we see falsehood and injustice and cruelty. We need to look unflinchingly at the trouble. And we need to speak the truth of beauty, of all that is good in ourselves and in the people we meet, even those very different from ourselves and in the world around us. To speak the truth not only with love, but with hope.